The Empire had conquered 600 star systems across 3 galactic arms. Their warships darkened the skies of 1,000 worlds. Their soldiers numbered in the trillions. For 12,000 years, they had never known defeat. Every species that encountered them either submitted or died. There was no third option. When the scouts first detected radio signals coming from a small yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, they dismissed it immediately. The signals were primitive. The technology was laughable. A quick scan revealed a species that had not even mastered fusion power yet. They were still burning dead organic matter for energy. They were still fighting wars among themselves over invisible lines drawn on their single habitable planet. Admiral Eth, commander of the expansion fleet, reviewed the scout report and laughed. His subordinates joined him. The idea of classifying these creatures as a threat was absurd. They could not even leave their own star system properly. Their fastest ships would take generations to reach the nearest star. They were isolated, primitive, and completely irrelevant. The High Council agreed. Terran space was marked on their maps with a simple notation: pre-spacefaring civilization, no strategic value, monitor but do not engage. The Empire had more important concerns. The Federation was growing bold on the eastern frontier. The mineral-rich cluster needed to be secured. Why waste resources on a species that posed no threat and offered no reward? This decision would prove to be the greatest mistake in history. 50 years passed. The Empire expanded further. They crushed in a brutal 3-year war. They absorbed the cluster and its precious minerals. They grew stronger, richer, and more confident than ever before. Occasionally, a scout would check on the Terrans and report back that they were still confined to their home system. The reports were filed and forgotten. Then the reports changed. The first warning came from a frontier outpost near the Terran exclusion zone. A strange vessel had appeared at the edge of their sensor range. It was small, crude, and clearly human-made, but it was traveling at speeds that should have been impossible for such a primitive design. Before the outpost commander could investigate, the vessel was gone. More followed. Human ships began appearing in neutral space, trading with minor species, establishing communications, building relationships. They were still primitive by standards, but they were learning fast, too fast. In just 50 years, they had gone from chemical rockets to rudimentary warp drives. Their population had spread to multiple planets and moons within their home system. They had built orbital stations and asteroid mining operations. Admiral Eth received these reports with growing unease. He remembered the scout data from 50 years ago. The humans had been nothing then. How had they advanced so quickly? It all models of technological development. Most species took thousands of years to achieve what the humans had done in decades. He requested permission to launch a preemptive strike. The High Council his request. The humans were still far behind technology. They had no military to speak of, just a handful of patrol ships. Attacking them would be wasteful and unnecessary. Besides, the Empire was preparing for a major offensive against the Syndicate of Free Worlds. All resources were committed. Eth obeyed, but he kept watching. He assigned his best intelligence officers to monitor Terran space. What they discovered terrified him. The humans were not following normal patterns of development. They did not build slowly and carefully like other species. They built recklessly, ambitiously, and in massive quantities. Their factories worked around the clock. Their research institutions shared information freely, accelerating progress exponentially. They did not have one government controlling everything. They had dozens of nations and corporations competing with each other, driving innovation through rivalry. But what disturbed Eth the most was their history. He accessed the human database known as the Internet and began reading. He learned about their wars, their famines, their plagues. He learned about the millions they had killed with primitive weapons. He learned about their endless conflicts, their genocides, their capacity for destruction. But he also learned something else. He learned that after every disaster they rebuilt. After every war they grew stronger. They did not surrender in the face of death. They adapted, evolved, and overcame. They had conquered species that surrendered after losing a single battle. The humans had endured world wars, nuclear standoffs, and pandemics, and emerged more determined than before. They were not like other species. They were survivors in a way that explanation. Eth sent his final report to the High Council. He warned them that the humans were dangerous, that they needed to be dealt with immediately before they became too powerful to stop. The Council read his report, discussed it briefly, and dismissed his concerns as paranoia. The humans were still a century behind technology at minimum. By the time they became a real threat, if ever, the Empire would have grown even more powerful. 20 more years passed. The offensive against the Syndicate down into a costly stalemate. Resources were stretched thin. The economy was straining under the weight of prolonged war. Colonies on the frontier began demanding independence. For the first time the Empire showed signs of weakness. The humans noticed. They arrived at the edge of territory not as raiders or invaders but as diplomats. Their ambassador, a small female with brown eyes and a calm voice, requested a meeting with the High Council. The Council, amused by the audacity of these primitives, agreed to receive her. The ambassador's name was. She stood before the 12 Towering who ruled a quarter of the galaxy and showed no fear. Her opening words silenced the chamber. You ignored us. You dismissed us as primitives. You assumed we would remain weak forever. That was your first mistake. Your second mistake was making enemies on every border while leaving your back unguarded. Your third mistake is happening right now as we speak. Before the Council could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the capital. Reports flooded in from across the Empire. A human fleet numbering in the thousands had appeared simultaneously at 18 different star systems. They were not using conventional warp drives. They were using something new, something they had never seen before. The humans called it quantum tunneling technology. They could appear anywhere instantly, without warning. The fleet scrambled to respond, but they were too slow. The human ships were not attacking colonies or stations. They were targeting something far more valuable, the Empire's hyperspace relay network. These relays allowed instantaneous communication across the vast distances of the Empire. Without them, fleet coordination would be impossible. Orders would take months to reach distant commanders. The Empire would be blind and deaf. Within 72 hours, 80% of the relay network was destroyed. The Council demanded an explanation. How had the humans developed such advanced technology so quickly? How had they built a fleet of this size without detection? How were they doing this? Answered their questions with a smile. You studied us briefly and drew conclusions based on your own experience. You assumed we would develop slowly like every other species you had encountered. You assumed our internal divisions made us weak. You assumed our violent history was a sign of primitiveness. You were wrong on all counts. Our divisions drive competition. Our conflicts taught us to fight. Our history made us hard. We do not break. We bend, we adapt, and we come back stronger. You gave us 70 years to prepare. That was more than enough. The war that followed lasted 3 years. It should have been impossible for the humans to win. They were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Their ships were smaller, their weapons less powerful, their territory a fraction of the Empire's size. But they had advantages the never anticipated. They were faster. Their quantum tunneling technology allowed them to strike anywhere and retreat before reinforcements could arrive. They attacked supply lines, isolated fleets, and picked the Empire apart piece by piece. They were smarter. Their decentralized command structure meant that every captain could make independent decisions without waiting for orders. They adapted to changing situations in real time, while commanders waited for instructions from a high council that could no longer communicate effectively. They were united. For the first time in human history, every nation on Earth had agreed to work together against a common enemy. Old rivalries were set aside. Resources were shared. Scientists from every country collaborated on weapons and defenses. The humans had always been capable of greatness when pushed. That had given them the push they needed. The final battle took place above Prime, the capital world of the Empire. The human fleet surrounded the planet, blocking all escape routes. Admiral Eth, now old and bitter, commanded the last defense force. He had warned them. He had begged them to act. They had not listened. The battle was short. The ships fought bravely, but they were outmaneuvered at every turn. Human tactics were unpredictable, creative, and ruthless. They used asteroids as weapons. They hacked into systems and turned their own turrets against them. They fought like they had nothing to lose because they had learned long ago that survival meant everything. When the flagship fell, Eth transmitted one final message to whatever might still be listening across the galaxy. We made a mistake. We saw them as primitives and ignored them. We saw their chaos and called them weak. We saw their history of violence and thought them savage. We did not understand. They were not weak because they fought each other. They were strong because they survived it. They were not primitives. They were predators waiting for prey. And we presented ourselves as the perfect target. Learn from our failure. Never ignore the humans again. Accepted the Empire's surrender on the steps of the Imperial Palace. The High Council knelt before her, defeated and humiliated. 12,000 years of conquest had ended in 3 years of war against a species they had dismissed as irrelevant. The treaty that followed was surprisingly merciful. The humans did not want to destroy the Empire. They wanted to reform it. They wanted trading partners, not subjects. They wanted a galaxy where species cooperated instead of conquered. They, having no choice, agreed to everything. In the decades that followed, humanity's reputation spread across the galaxy. Other empires heard the story of the and took note. The humans were not to be underestimated. They were not to be ignored. They were not to be provoked. The galaxy entered a new era of cautious peace. Wars still happened, but they were smaller, less destructive. Species that might have conquered their neighbors now hesitated, remembering what had happened to the humans had not just defeated an empire. They had changed the rules of galactic civilization. And it had all started because one arrogant admiral had looked at a small blue planet and laughed. He was not laughing anymore.